We're in Romans tonight, Romans chapter 1, back in Romans. I slightly apologize for if you're just showing up and this isn't up your alley. It is what it is. We're slowly going through line by line and breaking down the book of Romans. We started out in week 1 looking at Romans chapter 1, verses 1 through 7. It was the introduction. And then we looked at verses 8 through 15, where it talked about how he wanted to get to Rome. He wanted to meet them. He longed to be with him and them. And then last week, we talked about the whole foundation and premise of Romans. And that's, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's the power unto salvation. And we looked at, like, that's the real context of Romans, that it's a theological book. If you were here week 1 of Romans, it's the punch. This is where we find doctrine. This is where doctrine is found at. And I mentioned to us that a lot of times we think doctrine is our preferences, our worship styles, the music we like. That's not doctrine. The color carpet in the building, is there fog? Is there not fog? Is there lights? Is there no lights? Do you raise your hands? Do you use red book hymnals? Do you run around? Do you shout? Do you talk back to the preacher? All that's preferences. Paul don't talk about any of that carnal stuff. Sometimes our preferences, if we're not careful, they become carnal. They're good, but they're just what we want, right? Apostle Paul talks about doctrine, right? Who is Jesus? He's the Son of God. What it means to be Jesus Christ, our Lord. How he's the Son of David and the Son of God. And we looked at all of that. So we're about to get into it more heavily tonight. So bear with me for those of you that are not very studious or you're not very interested in deep theological concepts. That's where we're going tonight again. I'm hoping to bring Romans chapter 1, specifically verses 18 through 25, more alive to you. I know that we've read this. Most of us have read it many times, but I'm hoping tonight as we break it down piece by piece, we get something out of it that we haven't gotten before. So I got a question for you. If you have read Romans before, but over the last 3 weeks, you got something out of it that you haven't gotten before, raise your hand. Only raise your hand if you're like, oh man, I see that now. I didn't see it before. That's good, and that's the goal. Like, because a lot of times we get so used to just reading through it that we sometimes miss. Y'all know what I'm talking about? I do it all the time. Like, I'm reading through it so quick, almost like I just want to say I opened my Bible today. So I just kind of read through something so I could say I got a chapter done. But the truth is I got through the chapter, but the chapter didn't get through me. Anybody know what I'm talking about? A lot of folks, they're like, oh, yeah, I've read the Bible from cover to cover, but the cover still ain't in them, right? They still ain't got the Bible in them, but they got through the Bible. So this is like really the purpose of this is to look with an analytical, critical eye and to really break it down and say, what does that mean? When we see a four-part compound sentence, that we really break it down piece by piece, line by line to understand it in its entirety. So that's what we're going back to tonight. So again, Romans chapter 1, starting at verse 18. I'll go ahead and read through this entire part, 18 through 25. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. But because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds and four-headed animals and creeping things. Therefore, God also gave them up to uncleanliness in the lust of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves, and who exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshiped and served the creature rather than the creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. So are you guys picking up that this isn't like, there's a lot of scriptures you can read and they got punch on their own. You know what I mean? Like, you don't need to explain them. It just makes sense. This isn't the text here. You read this and it was like, what the heck did Paul just say? Be honest, was anybody like with me? And in some parts was like, oh yeah, I get it. But a lot of it, you're like, what is going on here? Okay, so we're going to break this down. That's the goal. We're going to break this down. Now, I'm going to tell you real quick that while I'm trying to help break this down, and I feel like I have a very good concept of it, every once in a while I even find myself having to stop and say, hold on, I knew that, or I studied that, or I learned that before, but then you forget it, and I have to figure it out again. So pray for me as we try to go through this together. Okay, so if we had to name this text here, verses 18 through 25, it would just be the condemnation of unbelievers. That's really what's happening here. Because remember, you got the introduction, and then after the introduction, it was like, hey, let me honor Rome and tell them we love you, we're coming to Rome eventually. And then last week was I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It was the whole hinging message of Romans. It's about the gospel of Jesus Christ. And now we're getting into the meat of it. And like I told you, remember I said, Paul said, hey guys, here's my name. That's his introduction. Here's who I am. Then he says, I love y'all, man. I want to come to Rome. I've been praying to get there. I just haven't got there yet. Man, I heard about you guys. You all are awesome. You are killing it, right? He's building them up. He's telling them how awesome they are. He wants to be there, all in preparation for him to tell them, really? You're condemned as unbelievers. Right? He's about to just hit him, he's just about to hit him with a right hook. And so what I wrote here is at this point of the letter, the introduction is complete. Thanksgiving has been made. Paul has explained why he hasn't been to Rome. And the theme of his epistle has been stated. Now, Paul turns to the heart of the doctrinal teaching in Romans. The good news, which will shortly follow, is that God has provided an atonement for our sins, which is Jesus. He's going to tell us about Jesus later on. But before we can appreciate the good news, Paul first delivers the bad news. So in verses 15 through 25, this is the bad news. So if you came tonight needing encouragement, you're going home tonight like desperate and deep depression. Because Romans 18 through 25 is probably not where you're going to go to if you need a message of hope. So if you came for a message of hope tonight, I encourage you to stay after service and find someone and say, he just messed me up even more. I need prayer. Right? Because I'm just telling you, this is not the message of hope. This is some doom or gloom. This is where the Apostle Paul's like, hey, I'm going to tell you good news in the following chapters. But first, I need to deliver the bad news. And he comes out the gate in verse 18, and Paul begins to lay the groundwork for a case against mankind's self-righteousness and the condemnation which results from God's judgment. Paul is about to prove to us why we need the righteousness of God. But before he can prove to us why we need Jesus, before he can tell us about Jesus, who we need, he needs to prove to us why we need him. Does that make sense? Let me say that one more time. Before he can tell us who Jesus is that we need, he has to tell us why we need him. So before we are revealed who Jesus is, Paul needs to tell us who we are. Because unless we understand who we are, we won't appreciate what Jesus did. Is everybody with me? And it's once you begin to understand that your life is messed up and that you deserve to go to hell and you deserve to be broken and desperate and miserable, and you start living in a sense of, man, I don't even deserve a good life. And then there's good news for you, though. Jesus died to redeem you, to make you whole, to fulfill you, to give you the fruit of the Spirit, to make you have a life of fullness and purpose and life and destiny. And then you're like, man, there's the good news. But if you found out that Jesus died for your sins, but you didn't know you were a sinner, that wouldn't be good news. The death of Jesus dying for your sins is only good news when you know you're a sinner. Right? So before he can begin to lay out the doctrinal proof, he first needs to reveal that we are messed up. So in 18 through 25, this is just simply the condemnation of believers, of unbelievers. So who's an unbeliever? Everyone is an unbeliever before they come to Christ. We all are. We all, you'll notice in following chapters, the wages of sin is death, and we have all fallen short of the glory of God. It says that all of our righteousness is as what? Filthy rags. All of us. So we're all messed up. And it's after we find out that we're messed up that we find out that there's a God who loves us. So Paul is just laying the foundation to say, hey, for you to properly appreciate who Jesus is, I need you to understand who you are. So he writes in verse 18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. That's what we're going to look at first. So this is the first verse. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all. So the wrath of God is revealed against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth of unrighteousness. So there's two things we're seeing here. First, we're seeing that the wrath of God is revealed, and is revealed against two people groups. The people groups is ungodliness and unrighteousness. Men is not gender specific. Men is just saying the human race, okay? So anyone who's saying, amen, I know God came to kill all those men. No, you missed it, okay? That's not what it's saying. It's saying God came to kill you too as a female man, okay? All right, so it's male and female. So for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of all men and women, the human race, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. So point number one. I keep looking back because I think I have it up there, but I don't. So hopefully you have notes, and hopefully you're looking at them right now. Point number one is, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven. Okay, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven. So the wrath of God is, you see, I got that in parentheses or quotation, is revealed, being used in present tense, meaning this is speaking of God's wrath on mankind now and continually. This is not talking about hell or judgment day alone, but his overall wrath. This is talking about God's wrath or vengeance being upon people today while they are still on this earth. The scripture says God is not mocked. A man reaps what he sows. So God's attitude towards man's sin is not one of tolerance. If he tolerated man's sinful ways and doesn't hold them accountable, his holiness and purity would be spoiled. Wrath is as essential to divine righteousness as love and mercy are. God cannot be free from giving wrath unless he also be free from his morals. Okay, I think that went over some people's heads. So I want to say that one more time. God cannot be free from giving wrath unless he also be free from his moral standard. Because wrath comes from judgment. And judgment comes from a judgment, something you're judging off of. And if God doesn't judge off of something, then there is no moral compass to begin with. And in the moment he has no moral compass, then there's nothing to judge off of. Therefore, there's no need for wrath, and there can't be wrath. Wrath only comes as a consequence from morals not being upheld. So what I'm saying is wrath is essential in divine judgment or in divine righteousness. Why? Why is it essential? Because we can't call God holy, but yet he lets unholy in his presence. So God would no longer be called holy if he let things that were unholy be in his presence. Does that make sense? So when it says the wrath of God is revealed from heaven, it says the wrath of God is revealed from heaven. So the wrath of God, that means it's present tense. So the wrath of God right now is being revealed, and the wrath of God will continuously be revealed. This is why we see God's wrath at various times. We know that the ultimate wrath is going to be in flaming fire, taking vengeance on those that know not God and obey not the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. So unfortunately, the wages of sin is death. We all got to die because of sin. So the ultimate wrath of God is sin, separates us from God, eternal damnation, right? But you know that there can be wrath from God today, right? A man reaps what he sows. So when Paul says the wrath of God is revealed, it's not saying it's going to be revealed. It's not saying it was revealed. It is revealed. It's constantly being revealed. And this is talking about, we got to understand something, that there is wrath that comes from God. And when we don't live well, unfortunately, we pay the consequences for it. Two people got it, right? A man reaps what he sows. If you don't treat people well, I mean, it's the reality of it's like it's as real as the law of gravity. It's as real as the law of gravity. When we honor God and put God in everything we do, God honors us. When we take God out of things, God takes things out of us. God takes stuff away from us. When we honor people, God will honor us. When we walk humbly and vulnerably, God will honor us. When we're prideful and arrogant, God will knock us down. And it's like, well, why? Why would God's wrath come on me? Because God is holy. God is just. And because of a standard of holiness that's in his life and who he is, and it's the very standard of our entire world, there is something called the laws of morale. There is morale in our world of morals, the moral compass. And when we're not living by the laws of the moral compass and we live outside of that, we pay for that. Has anybody ever lived outside of making good moral decisions and you paid for it? You pay for it. Why? Why do I pay for making bad decisions? Because God is just and God is holy, and you cannot live contrary to God and expect to be blessed forever. And the moment God would allow us to continue to be blessed, even though we're evil, means that he is compromising his own moral stance. Is everybody with that? So the wrath of God is revealed from heaven, all right? So, and wrath is essential to divine righteousness as love and mercy, as love and mercy are. So again, God is love. God has mercy, and God is divine righteous, and those things are essential. But we've got to understand. But what's also essential is wrath, and wrath has to come when we are not living according to the moral standard of God. It has to, because God is just. He's just, and he only rules justly. So the first thing Paul is saying is the wrath of God is revealed from heaven. He's letting them know, hey guys, don't be surprised by this. God's wrath is on us all. We are enemies with God. The creator of the world, who will ultimately decide where your soul will end up for eternity, is enemies with you. He's not your friend. You're not his child. You're not his servant. You are an enemy of his. You are his foe. And because you are his foe, the wrath of himself is on you. Everybody got it? And then it says, okay, but who's it on? For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven, right? Against who? Against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men and women. Okay, so who is God's wrath against? I wrote here, all those who practice ungodliness and unrighteousness, right? Thank you, Stevie, right? Anybody else? Okay, so against ungodliness and unrighteousness. So here's the question. What is ungodliness? What is unrighteousness? What are they? Are they different? All those who practice ungodliness and unrighteousness is what he says. So ungodliness is someone who does not believe in God. It's simple. Ungodliness. It's someone that's not walking in godliness. They're not walking with God. Their life is not centered around God. They don't have any faith in God. Ungodliness is someone who does not believe in God. They don't respect God, and they have no interest in God. That's ungodliness. Ungodliness would be someone who has no interest in God, doesn't respect God, and doesn't believe in God. But keep in mind, you can be ungodly and unrighteous, but you can also be someone who respects God, believes in God, and has interest in God, but still is unrighteous. See, because they're two different things. There's ungodliness and unrighteousness. Just because someone comes to church and they identify as godly because they respect God, they identify as godly because they believe God, and they identify with godly because they're interested in God, doesn't mean that they're righteous. So you can be godly but unrighteous. Does that make sense? Okay, so I wrote unrighteousness means, okay, look it up. You can look it up yourself. You can cross-check this later. Unrighteousness means sinful, wicked, unjust, or morally corrupt. We can't be righteous, meaning morally pure, unless we first become godly. It is through godliness that one becomes righteous. And it also is through ungodliness that one becomes unrighteous. Godliness reveals a standard of God, and ungodliness has no standard at all because they have no God to measure from. For example, an idol does not have a standard of morals because it's an idol. Therefore, the ungodly person who worships an idol has no standard of right and wrong, and the truth is relative. The unrighteous person lives as there has been no will of God revealed. The ungodly person lives as if there is no God at all, and God's wrath is against both. So let me explain real quick this, if I can. What do you think comes first, godliness or righteousness? Two say righteous, three say righteous, a bunch said godly. What's that? Which one comes first in us? Good question. Godliness comes first. Because you can't be righteous without God. Right? You can't. So you ever heard somebody say, I just need to get my life together and then I'm coming to church? And like, don't get your life together and then come to church because you'll never come. Right? You need to come right now and let God clean you up. Just come as you are. Why do we say that? The reason we say that is because godliness is most important. It's primary. Until you have godliness. Godliness is a concept that you believe in God. Godliness is a concept that you have faith in God. Godliness is a concept that you view your entire life by God. Now that you're walking in godliness, trying to be godly, trying to be upright, trying to live right, these things, right? Like you're living about the concept that there's a God. And now that you're living by the concept that there is a God, you have the ability to become more righteous. Because you're aware of there being a God, so you're trying to become like God, and when you're pursuing to become like God, you become righteous. But when you begin to try to pursue righteousness, what righteousness are you pursuing if you're not pursuing the righteousness of God? Now you're only pursuing your own righteousness, self-righteousness. Right? When God is not the moral compass, all of the good things you're trying to do is self-righteous. But when God is the moral compass and everything's hinged on Him, your righteousness is God's righteousness. Does that make sense? This is why it's so important that we always ask ourselves. I always ask this question to people when I'm talking about them. I say, all right, first we need to find out something. Before we can argue back and forth, and I don't mean argue, debate, have a good, healthy conversation, the first thing I need to know is what's your moral compass? Because if our moral compasses are different, it's hard to have a conversation. Right? Is your moral compass your grandmother? Is your moral compass your family? Is your moral compass your political party, your worldviews? See, what brings us all together is that we all believe in God, so we are all walking in godliness. And since we're all walking in godliness, even though I've got someone here who's maybe 80 years old and grew up in a different generation than me, someone who grew up in a white family, Hispanic family, black family, different worldviews, different cultures, different socioeconomical statuses, right? Different. But we all have the same moral compass. Why? Because we're all walking in godliness. But when you take God out of the equation, our righteousness is only what we've been taught. So what comes first? Godliness. I pursue God. I want a relationship with God. And as I am pursuing God, pursuing who He is, as time progresses, I become more righteous. A godly person becomes more righteous. But they are daily aware of God and they are walking in godliness. Matter of fact, if one grows, I think righteousness grows. Righteousness is growing. Godliness is we are aware and we are walking in who He is, but I'm continuously trying to grow and become better. Right? So as we're looking at this, I just want us to, do we understand godliness versus unrighteousness, the two words? All right, cool. So we got these two different words, so going back now, we can't be righteous, meaning morally pure, unless we first become godly. You got to first become godly before you can become morally pure. If we could become morally pure without God, the question is, why did Jesus die? Right? That's what Paul is trying to show us here, is that the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against anyone and everyone who's ungodly and unrighteous, and you cannot change that unless you have God. So it is through godliness that we become righteous, and it is also through ungodliness that someone becomes unrighteous. If someone doesn't care about God and doesn't think about God, they have no moral compass. But when someone cares about God, then they have a moral compass. Dads become better dads. Husbands become better husbands. Women become better mothers and better wives when they are walking in godliness, because they are aware of the moral compass and they pursue righteousness. But when you don't have God or a care for God, you only do what you think's good enough. So as I gave the example about an idol, I know we don't know as much about idols in our country, but they are a real thing. You may go to an Asian restaurant and you see that little fat Buddha, right? Burning incense, right? I went to a restaurant the other day. I love it. It's like one of my favorite. Faux Viet, I think is how you would pronounce it. And you go in there and they got a lighter and Buddha sitting right at the bottom. They ready to light him up all the time. Right? That food good though, bro. I mean, but they got idols, and they be doing weird stuff. And I'm saying that because we maybe don't understand idols, but these are real. People all around the world believe there's power in statues and objects. This is real. And I say that because an idol has no standard, because it's an idol. Or if it does have a standard, the standard is whatever that idol decided. Therefore, if someone is following an idol, their standard is simply the standard of the one who implemented it. This is where truth becomes relative. And everyone does whatever the heck they want because it feels like it's right in their own eyes. The unrighteous person lives as if there has been as if there has been no will of God revealed. The ungodly person lives as if there is no God at all. So again, an unrighteous person lives as if there has been no God revealed. An ungodly person lives as if there's no God at all. And in either way, God's wrath is against them both. So again, let me read it in its entirety. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against the ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. So it doesn't matter if you're unrighteous or simply you don't believe in God. In both cases, you can believe God, but if you're unrighteous, you deserve to go to hell. If you don't believe in God and you think you're righteous, you still deserve to go to hell. And then it says, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. So now we're looking at who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. So I wrote here, God's wrath is against those who are ungodly. God's wrath is against those who are unrighteous. But God's wrath, it says, and who suppress the truth in their sin, or who suppress the truth in their unrighteousness. So the word suppress, if you look at it in the Greek, katecho, sounds good to me. I'll act like I know it. Katecho. The Greek word, katecho, which literally means to hold down or to take possession and seize. So when we look at that word, to hold, katecho, which means to hold down, take possession of, or seize, suppress. It says such as a holding. Think about a beach ball. I don't know how many of y'all been to the beach or maybe in a pool and you try to hold a ball underwater. You gotta suppress it down. You gotta hold that beach ball underwater, and it's moving all around. But it takes a lot of focus to keep a ball that is inflated underwater. Has anybody done it before? It takes a lot of work to keep, and you got to focus in order to keep that ball down. And Paul is saying that the ungodly and the unrighteous have had the righteousness of God revealed to them, but yet they have held it down. They prevented it from not being developed because of their own unrighteousness. Okay, so what Paul is saying, and so now we read it in its entirety. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth of unrighteousness. Meaning, they've heard of God, they're aware of God, they heard about the things of God, but they're working as hard as they can to push this ball and keep it underwater, and they're suppressing. They're preventing. Look up the word suppress. It's to prevent the development of. It is to work very hard to keep something down. And it's saying that God is against, and it says that his wrath is being revealed against those who are working really hard to hold down the truth of unrighteousness. They're working really hard, it says, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. So now what we're seeing is you can suppress the truth in unrighteousness. So we can suppress the truth of God. We can suppress who God is by our own unrighteousness. Then we go to verse 19. Because what may be known to God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. All right, this is going to make sense, I think. So I wrote here, how can the Apostle Paul make such a bold claim that the ungodly have indeed known God? Look what he says. Look at verse 19. Because what may have been known of God is manifest in them. Look what he's making a claim that what may have been known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. So we know who we're talking about, right? Who's the people we're talking about? The ungodly, the unrighteous, those that suppress the truth. Right? They're trying to push it down like a ball and keep it underwater. He says, look, I know they're unrighteous. I know they're ungodly. I know they're trying to suppress the truth like a ball underwater. But what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. How can the Apostle Paul make such a bold claim that the ungodly have indeed known of God and have suppressed the truth? See, because when you suppress the truth, it's saying there's an intentional effort that you are doing something. How can the Apostle Paul, when Paul doesn't personally know them? How many times has he been to Rome? None. If he's never been to Rome, how is he writing this letter and talking about and he's talking like he personally knows them. He's talking about these wicked people who are either ungodly or they're unrighteous, and he's making this blanket statement that they suppress the truth, that they are making an intentional effort to suppress the truth. Paul doesn't know them personally. How can he make a claim that they indeed have known God, but yet they're suppressing the truth? It is because he is saying the knowledge of God is manifested in each of them and in each of us. We're going to keep reading and it'll make sense. And God has shown truth to everyone. We all have the knowledge of God, is what Paul's saying. Paul is saying that every man has a sufficient knowledge of God to make him responsible to God. Each man has enough knowledge of God to make him curious of God, to make him desire to seek out God. So in my opinion, it's like because what may have been known is manifested in them, for God had shown it to them. So what we see is that God can show something to an ungodly or an unrighteous person, but we still run the risk of suppressing it. Right? Intentionally suppressing it. Look at verse 20, and it'll begin to make more sense. Verse 20, for since the creation of the world, and look, this sentence is proving the last part where Paul said in verse 19 that God has shown it to them, that he's been manifested in them. He says, and let me show you how. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without what? Excuse. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. So Paul is saying that since the beginning of time, man has known there is a God because his attributes are clearly seen. In a nutshell, if we look at the effect, meaning our earth and all that's in it, and what we see today, it should point us to the cause, which is God. Everything, yes, yep, you are exactly right. Mandy said like the birds. And you're spot on. It's everything in our world. What Paul is saying is it is impossible to look at how magnificent our world is and not see that there's not an intelligent being behind it all. That's what Paul's saying. He's saying that it is impossible. And in Psalms 19:1, you saw I put that there in parentheses, and I'm just going to read it. You don't need to turn there. It says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. So it's saying that you can see God. In the NLT version, it says, the heavens proclaim the glory of God, and the skies display his craftsmanship. How many of y'all have looked outside on some beautiful night? I know my brother sent me those pictures of the northern lights, and how many of y'all saw the northern lights? I mean, if you can't go up on a high cliff and look out and just see the mountains and the valleys and not know there's a God, then you have been desensitized. Right? That's what the Apostle Paul is trying to say here. He's saying he says, since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen. He said, you can't see God, but all you got to do is look around and you can see God. It says being understood by the things that are made. The point I'm making here is we got to be careful because intelligent people will always come around and try to outwit us. But there's always something that just doesn't make sense. You can follow it, all of them back. Like let's just be like, okay, look, no one would say that this just popped up. There's no way that this MacBook Air just popped up. We know that there is a creative brain behind this. Someone that, can you just imagine either Bill Gates or Steve Jobs sitting in their garage and just thinking about making some sort of microchip or these little chips and they're going to go into something and they're going to have a display think about it. I mean, and there was an intelligent design. None of us here would think that we just the clothes would just pop up, that this would just pop up. None of us. We all know that if we see a house, someone built it. If we see a computer, somebody designed it. But yet, our secular system wants to convince us that our entire world was by an accident. If the sun was any further away, we'd burn up. If it was any closer, we'd burn up. If it was any further away, we'd freeze to death. You just look at how it moves and how the solar system and the movement of all this, the sun, the moon, the stars, the earth, and it's beautiful. Our circulatory systems and all of our organs and the way we give children, how women give birth to children, and just it is too much of an intelligent design, but yet we're taught by time and chance and matter over a period of millions of years, matter accidentally collided, and boom, here we are. And then at some point, a tadpole climbed out of the water and then turned into a human being, and then here we are today, right? And it's like, but it doesn't make sense because you begin to think about it and say, okay, so fine, all right, fine, I'm a monkey, and before the monkey, I was a tadpole. Before a tadpole, I was this. Okay, I get it. But my question is, where did the tadpole egg come from? Someone made something. Or we say the Big Bang. Big Bang doesn't mean that there's not a God, because it's very possible that when God said, let there be light, that there was a Big Bang. Right? So I'm not here to argue about a Big Bang. What I'm here to argue is we say time plus chance plus matter. So over a series of millions of years, by absolute accident, that's chance, matter collided. But my question is, where did the matter come from? Matter had to be created to collide and make our world. And so the reality is whether you're an evolutionist or whatever other scientific theory you take, the position doesn't matter. We always come back to the same thing. There was something that originated it all. And if we think that this didn't just pop up, why would we think our bodies, as intelligent as they are, would just pop up? And what the Apostle Paul was trying to say is, all you have to do is look out, and you can see God. And if you don't see God, it's because your culture has corrupted you. Because the attributes of God are clearly seen. And you can see God's handiwork through His creation. This is why He said in the scripture before that God manifests Himself in them and God has shown Himself to them, because God has shown Himself to all of us. And then in verse 19 He says, I'm going to tell you how God showed Himself to all of us. Since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen. You may not want to give God credit, but God's behind it. You can call it scientific, you can call it Big Bang, you can call it evolution, you can call it Mother Earth, you can call it whatever you want, but I'm telling you, it is nothing but a divine being that created everything. That's what Paul's saying. Since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. We can see God by the things that are made. Then he says, even his eternal power and Godhead. So because mankind is not like animals, and we were made in his image, we have the ability to be awakened by his glorious handiwork and to gain the basic idea of God through simply looking upon his creation. Through looking at nature, we as humans should see more than just beauty. We should also see the supreme being that's behind the beauty, that created it all. This knowledge of God is something that spurs a man to faith or curiosity to God. So what it's saying is, since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen. We can see God through his creation. Being understood by the things that are made, so we see God by the things that are made. But not only do we see the things of God by the things that are made, but we see his eternal power and Godhead so that they are without excuse. What he's saying is, when you look out at everything that he's made, you don't only see his beautiful creation, but you see the power of the Godhead. When we get sick and somehow our own immune system knows how to fight it off, I mean, we are too intelligent. We've got to stop giving credit to the wrong person. The purpose of looking at the beauty of all God's creation is ultimately that A, first we can see there is a God, and B, that it reveals the eternal power in Godhead. So basically, the more we are aware of his creation, the more it should spur us towards curiosity of him. Does that make sense? If you meet someone and you're in all of them, you love their character, you love their magnetic personality, you love their charisma, you love their work ethic, you love how they run their family, whatever. You love the attributes you see that come from them, right? Then you become curious to know them. Because you see their fruit and now you're curious to know them. It's the same thing with God. We see the fruits of the world, the fruit of everything here, and it's meant to draw us to a curiosity of God. So really, when you think about this, it says even his eternal power and Godhead. It's saying that this is drawing us to him. And then it says, so that they are without excuse. So what's Paul saying? Paul is saying no man is without excuse. We should all know that there is a God. Why? Because this world is too intelligent for there not to be one. We should all know there's a God because this world is too intelligent for there not to be one. We should all know that there's a God because the world is too intelligent for there not to be one. We may not know what God expects or what is truth, but we should be able to look out and see everything that's created. And we should be asking those questions because we know that there's something greater than ourselves. The goal is that the beauty of our world opens our eyes and we say, man, there must be a God. And then we say, Lord, if there is a God, I want to pursue you. Now you're godly. And now that you're walking in godliness because you're aware there's a God, because you see his creation, now you're pursuing God, which will make you righteous because you're discovering who he is. But what drew you to be hungry to godliness is his creation. What drew you to righteousness is godliness. And Paul is saying that if we just open our eyes and look out, we'll see there's a God. And if we see there's a God, we'll be curious and pursue him. And as you pursue him, he'll make you like him. Thank you. I'm really glad you're here every week. Don't ever not come. If you're skipping, I'm not teaching. In the last 2 years, you started learning scriptures. Amen. That does my heart well because I know you've been in church your whole life. And I praise God that now, that does my heart well. So thank you. Thank you. That's the goal. So verse 21. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God. Remember, because we got to go to that verse before, it says, so they are without excuse. So they already know God. Look, they may not want to, be curious to be godly or become righteous, but they know God. Why? Because there's no excuse. God is saying there is no excuse. When we die and we get to heaven and we're like, I didn't know there was a God. I mean, my teacher was a scientist. He believed in evolution. He did this. He did that. He says, yeah, but you could not reject that there had to be something. All you had to do was open your eyes. That's what he's saying. Paul is saying that there is no excuse. Now look, here's the thing. We're not talking about what's the right God. We're not talking about what the right thing of righteousness is. We're just saying we got to first establish that there is a God. Okay, that's all Paul's talking about right now. He says, I just want y'all to understand, we got to clarify that there is a God. Okay, so we've not gotten into doctrine yet. We're just saying there is a God, right? Everybody with me? Okay, so because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. So let's break this one down. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God. Let me say that again since I said that poorly. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God. Paul is saying, yes, they knew God, and they did not honor him as God. They rejected him. So Paul is saying, you can know of God, but reject God. Got it? So number one, you can't argue there's not a God, because all you got to do is open your eyes and everyone will see there is one. So everyone is without excuse. But then he goes on to say, hey, you can even say you know God because you've seen him. But I don't care if you knew God, because you can know him and still reject him. So do you see the different layers that Paul's putting in here? Don't say that there's not a God, because anyone can see there is a God. Just open your eyes. Okay, great, you see there is a God. But just because you see there's a God don't mean that you're living with God, because you can reject God though you see God. Is that confusing? If it was, would you tell me? All right, I hope so. And then it says, nor were thankful. So it says, all they knew God and did not glorify him, nor were thankful. Now he's saying, not only were they not living for God, but they weren't even thankful for God. Paul is saying it's bad enough they don't live for God, but they could have at least appreciated the gift of life and all the wonderful things associated with life. So now we're seeing Paul is saying, first of all, some of y'all saying there is no God, that won't work, because everyone can see God. Open your eyes. And he says, okay, now some of y'all see God, but that ain't enough, because your life is still rejecting him. And then he says, and then some of y'all not only rejecting God, but you ain't thankful. Here you are only alive because of God, and you have no appreciation for the life that you're living. And then he goes on, he says, but you have become futile in your thoughts. Thank you. He said, what that mean? I'd love to tell you. Thank you for asking. I love it when somebody asks. When someone becomes completely ungodly and unrighteous, with no respect, they reject God, they have no thanksgiving for God, they are on the verge of a futile mind. Paul said these people had become futile in their minds, meaning they had no useful purpose and they were completely ineffective in their thoughts. In the King James Version, it says they became vain in their imagination. If I would click on futile here, just to give you the definition, futile means incapable of producing any useful results. Incapable of producing any useful results. So it's saying when someone is completely ungodly, they don't even believe in God. They don't believe there's a God. When someone is unrighteous, when they don't respect God, they have no thanksgiving toward God, we are on the verge of becoming futile, which means we are on the verge of becoming someone that is simply useless, incapable of producing anything of good result. You can't produce anything of good result when you have no thanksgiving towards God, no respect towards God, no godliness, and no righteousness. You become incapable of producing anything useful. And Paul is saying minds will become futile if they continue to live like this. Their foolish hearts, keep going, their foolish hearts were darkened by suppressing the truth of God and believing man-made falsehood. They plunged their foolish heart into deeper darkness. So we're beginning to just see a pattern here. So Paul is talking about the unrighteousness, that the wrath of God is revealed against the ungodly and unrighteous men who do what? Who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because they knew of God, God manifested himself in them, and he's shown himself to them. And he said, God, and then he says, Paul, how do we know God? How does everyone know God? He says, everyone knows God. Since the creation of the world, you've seen God through his invisible attributes. That's clearly seen. You can see God. Just open your eyes and look outside. Everything that God made, you can see God. But not only you can see God through his creation, you can see his eternal power in the Godhead. No one is going to have an excuse. And then he goes on to say, and let me tell you, be careful, because if you keep living like this, not giving God glory, not being thankful, your mind, you're going to become incapable of anything good, and your foolish heart will become darkened. So what it means is if you keep suppressing the truth and running from God and rejecting God, eventually God will just turn your heart over and let it become hard and dark. I told you it wasn't really encouraging, right? Look at verse 22. Professing to be wise, they became fools. When they exalted their human, I wrote here, when they exalted their human reasoning and paraded their own wisdom around, they acted as fools, which ultimately led to their hearts becoming dark. So keep in mind, this, in my opinion, is much like even today, where a lot of people can argue how there is not a supreme being, there isn't a divine God, and all of this was accidental, coincidental, by chance, so on and so forth. And they have so much intelligence. They're so smart. They use such big words. They're enticing. They're intimidating. And it makes us feel stupid. But the reality is this. They are professing to be wise, but they will be fooled. And this is the thing we've got to be careful of, because a lot of times you'll look out and you'll behold all of the glory and the splendor and the beauty, and you'll talk about the intelligent design, but yet we ourselves are so intelligent that we profess to be so wise that we never give credit to the God who's more wise and created it all. And this is what happens so oftentimes. It was happening in Paul's time. That's why he wrote it. But it happens right now. Some of the smartest people are anti-God because their brains are so big and they've learned so much. But you know what? So many times, even those intelligent people get brought to their knees. This is why you see people like Darwin, who was the advocate and the one leading the charge on evolution. Before he dies, he surrenders to Christ. This is why you got people like Joshua McDowell, who's a scientist out to disprove the Bible and Jesus' existence, only to become one of the people who write multiple books on the existence and the deity of Christ. The reality is everyone, if they keep studying and try to disprove, will only find themselves proving the Bible accurate, because that's exactly what it is. We have to be careful about our wisdom, because there's some things that we won't be able to explain. There are some things that you just can't explain. Now, I do love, there's questions about like the earth, and, earlier I used to try to argue that, and because it's like, well, the earth is millions of years old or billions of years old, and you all say the Bible and blah, blah, but what I found out through continuing to study is actually we agree as Christians that the earth is billions of years old, because we don't know how long the earth sat before God started creating. And that he didn't create the sun, moon, and stars until what, like this third day or something? And we know that time is measured by the sun, right, and orbit. So time wasn't even kept until like day 3. And the earth was made before the first day. So we don't know for how many years, millions of years. Time wasn't even a factor before the third day. So the earth could have sat empty and void for billions of years. People say dinosaurs. Dinosaurs isn't in the Bible. Some people say, well, yeah, dinosaurs isn't in the Bible. It's in one Old Testament book. Whatever. You can call it a dinosaur, call it not. Doesn't matter. The point is even though the Bible doesn't talk clearly about dinosaurs, it doesn't mean dinosaurs didn't exist. I don't need to say all these people are fake. They found these bones. They aren't real, blah, blah, blah. No, we'll say dinosaurs existed. When did they exist? They could have existed before creation. We don't know. God could have done whatever he wanted in the earth before he created as we know it. And I'm saying all of this because a lot of times people will try to disprove the Bible, but the reality is we got to understand, we may never know it all. And we can't, because we only use, how much of our brains do we use? 10%? You said a third. If we used a third, we'd be smart. It ain't a third. No, it's less than that. You say 10%? Is that right? Is that the final answer? Is it 10%? 10% of our brain. I mean, think about that. We're using 10% of our brains putting planes in the sky. We're using 10% of our brains creating like the internet, talking, and somehow the waves make it through the air invisibly to someone I'm trying to reach on the phone in another country. 10% of our brains. And I say that because if we're using 10% of our brain, just use common sense here. If we're using 10% of our brains, and maybe there is a God, there's got to be a God. And they say, oh, yeah, God didn't create everything. How can he speak things into existence? How could that be? Oh, that's just a bunch. That doesn't even make sense. Oh, look, those are fairy tales of the Bible. 10% of our brains. If we've got everything we have today with 10% of our brains, look at our nation, 10% of our brains. Look at the nation, or look at the city of Dubai. My goodness, just like 20, 30 years ago, 10% of a brain. And now we're talking about God who has no limitations, has no interruption, no effect by sin, who is outside of time. Right? And if we are made in his image and we've done all that we've done with 10%, how in the world will we let the enemy convince us that there's not a God that can create everything? Surely God can hang the earth in nothing and create from nothing if we have created everything we see from nothing. This earth had nothing on it before we got here. So if we created everything in this world and it started at nothing and this is what we've got now, what is so hard to believe that God didn't create this world from nothing? We're made in his image. right? And if we're procreating and we're creating and we're innovative, then why would we not think God can do the same and so much more? So I say that to always come back to humility. I always come back to the reality that, you know what? I may not know it all, but everything's too intelligent for there not to be a God. Why is this so important? Because we got to first know there is a God before we're curious of him. And then once we know there is one, we become curious of him, because once we're curious of him, we're curious of what my role is in him. And we're curious of how I'm to live like him. And then we discover purpose because it's with him. But none of this would be established and found if it didn't start with a curiosity. And a curiosity wouldn't have come unless we would have first seen there's got to be something bigger. And Paul is saying no one is with excuse. Everyone can look out and see there's something bigger. So we look at those scriptures. You can look at them later. It's about pride and professing to be wise. They became fools. Last page, number 23. They changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man and birds and the four-footed animals and creeping things. So what he's saying is these people who are very bright and intelligent people, they don't think there's a God. They're relying in their own stuff, their own righteousness, self-righteousness. They're ungodly. There's no godliness in them, okay? They're without excuse. They're not thankful. They're not grateful. They're not appreciative. They have no reference of God. And God's saying there is no excuse. There is no excuse. You are a fool. And he says, and he says, here's what these people do. They have changed the glory of God they changed the glory of the incorruptible God into the image made of corruptible men. So it's saying, it's kind of like if you read in the book of Genesis, is it Exodus? In Exodus, where they made the golden calf because God didn't come quick enough, and they said, we want a God like everybody else, and they made a golden calf where we could fast forward to the time of when they were about to have a king. God says, you don't need a king, you have me. They said, no, we want a king like everybody else. He says, fine, I'll give you Saul, because what we see here is the Israelites, first they wanted a calf, they wanted something they could identify with, and then they wanted a king, something they could identify with. Right? And what we're seeing here is the Apostle Paul is saying that you are taking the incorruptible God and you're trying to make him an image. You want a God to fit you. You're trying to make a God to fit you. Right? This is why people who are black got the black Jesus on the wall, and people who are white got the white Jesus on the wall. And and you think it's funny. I'm telling you, you go to Asia, they got the Chinese, they got the Asian Jesus on the wall. I've seen the dreadlock Jesus, the Rastafarian Jesus on the wall. I'm serious. Because we want our God to look like us. Right? It's why it talks about people will have itchy ears because they want him to look like them, sound like them. And he says that you have changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made by corrupt men. And it says even birds and four-footed animals and creepy things. Why is this? Because they had this thing where they would make animals God. This is why during the times of Joseph, they were like, hey, we want to worship God during the time of Moses and Pharaoh, and they wanted to offer sacrifices. And Pharaoh said, why don't you offer your sacrifices here in Egypt? And what did Moses say? He says, we can't offer our sacrifices here. You need to let us go. Why'd they have to go? Because they were going to sacrifice what the Egyptians called holy. They worshiped cows. They would worship these animals. This ain't crazy. They do it today. Today in certain cultures, they don't worship cows and other sacred animals because they believe they're gods. And Paul is saying that what happens is you become so smart and you want to make God what you want to be that you end up turning birds and four-legged animals and creepy things into your idols. So they created their own God. They made God to fit them, to fit their personality, to fit their immorality. And by creating a God suitable for their own foolish mind, they violated the first two commandments in Genesis 20 because they made idols. They made gods to fit their lifestyle. The measurement for right and wrong became subjective based on the person or the animal. For example, when a cow was their god, the cow was their moral code of conduct. And all of this stems from Genesis chapter 3, when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the serpent said to Eve, God will make you know good from evil. And and that's kind of true, and kind of what he was saying is he says, God don't want you to eat from this tree because when you eat, you will know good from evil. But the thing is Adam and Eve didn't need to know good from evil. You know why? Because God already told them what good and evil was. If God told them what good and evil was, why did they need to know what good and evil was? They didn't. See, so what happens is they ate from that tree and they became autonomous, meaning they now get to choose what good and evil is. So now good and evil was determined by God, told to Adam and Eve, but suddenly they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and now who determines what good and evil is? They do. And that is our entire world today. Everyone has their own standard of what good and evil is, just like it says in the book of Judges, that everyone lived according to their own standard. Right? And that's the thing. That's what I want us to understand here, is talking about. We got to be careful, because what we do is we try to take the incorruptible God and we try to morph him into what we want him to be for us. And it might be a Buddha, it might be a cow, it might be work. And we say, serving God is working a lot and having a lot of money. Serving God is owning a bunch of property. Right? And we make this our idol. And then we say, oh, yeah, this is good. This is good. There's no problem with that. There's no problem with that. Yeah, this is good. Says who? Good compared to who? Good compared to most? Yeah, good compared to most, but is it good compared to God? So that's why we always have to ask, what is the rule that we're measuring by? What's the standard? So number 24, verse 24, therefore God also gave them up to uncleanliness in the lust of their hearts and dishonor their bodies among themselves. So when Paul said that God gave them up to their uncleanliness, he was saying that God put his hands in the air and said, what do you want? Well, do what you want. I have tried and I have tried. I'm done. He said. So when he says God just gave them up, it's like God put his hands in his hair and he says, you know what, just do what you want. I tried and I tried. Essentially, he was saying that God, if you want to avoid me and act like I am non-existent, then that is fine. I will let the lust of your heart remain, and I will let you dishonor your own body. Do whatever the heck you want. Do as you please. So when he says that he gave them up, he literally raised his hand and said, I'm done. You do what you want. I'm giving, fine. I've tried. You've seen my attributes. I've pursued you. I've tried. And you know what? You ain't listening. He raised his hand and says, I'm done. You do what you want. And he gave them over to their own lust. Go ahead and worship that. Go ahead and work all these hours. Go ahead and pursue all these things. Go ahead and do what's in you. Go ahead and keep dishonoring your bodies. You know why? Because you have free will, and I'm not going to keep trying anymore. And he throws his hands up and lets them do what they want. And then it says, who exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worship and serve the creature rather than the creator, who is blessed forever. So God said, do as you please, because you have exchanged the truth of God for a lie and would rather worship things that the creator created than worshiping the creator. These people degraded themselves in the act of putting these created things at a higher position than the one who created them. And he says, fine. It says, fine, you've exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and you have worshiped and served the creator of the creation rather than the creator. So I'm done. I'm going to raise my hands, and I'm going to let you do whatever you want. And he gave them up and just do what you want. And God is showing us through the Apostle Paul the very pattern of the human race. This is the pattern of the human race. If you were with me when we did the Bible project where we just went through the Bible book by book, you saw that this is the very pattern. It started out in Genesis, things were great, and then Adam failed. And then he had to restore them. And he restored them, and then guess what? Cain failed. And then he had to offer forgiveness there. And then guess what? Then you had Lamech, and he failed. He was an evil man. Then after him, all the people were evil. And God says, you know what? I'm going to work through Noah. He works through Noah. And then after Noah, Noah failed. And then after that, then it goes on. And then it's like finally you got Abraham, right? And then you have Isaac, and you got all these people are failing miserably. We get to Moses, 1400 BC. And God's like, man, I am so determined to bring the presence of God back to my people. I tried to do it through Adam. He failed. I tried to do it through Noah. He failed. I tried to do it through Abraham. This didn't work. Tried to do it here. And it's never working. It's never working. I'm trying. And you know what? He doesn't give up. He goes back, he remembers the promise, goes to Moses, delivers the people, and he says, hey, I want to bring my presence down to you. I want to come down to the bottom of this mountain and be with you with my presence. And the people rejected him. They said, God, we don't want you to come down here. Send Moses up on the mountain to the presence of God, but presence of God, please don't come down here to us. Here God's trying to get down among the people of Israel, and God says, the people said, no, we don't want to, no. We would rather Moses go to God and come back to us rather than God coming to us. And what do we see? What we're seeing all through the Bible is this constant pattern over and over again where God tries, people fail. God tries, people fail. God tries, people fail. God tries, people fail. And now Paul is reiterating the same thing. Hey guys, it's the same thing that we've seen through the whole entire Old Testament. God tries, people fail. You have no excuse, you've seen his glory. You have no excuse, you've seen his handiwork. You've rejected him. You're not thankful for him. You have allowed yourself to become so concerned with what you want that now your minds are incapable of good because your hearts are hard and darkened. He's showing them that in the epistle of Romans, he's simply echoing everything the entire Bible has always said, that men are screwed up. And now he's going to start teaching theological stuff. This is why you need Jesus. Is everybody kind of with me? All right, cool. We're done because we're over. Just like that. God, help us to grow and to become better individuals. That's the goal in life, is that every day I become a better human being. That I understand you better, that I understand myself better, that we understand people better. The goal is that the older we get, the more godly we become. The older we get, the more we look like you. It's the process of sanctification. And I pray that you will help each and every one of us to understand that it's easy to see God. We just got to open our eyes. Help us to be so hungry for you and curious of you that we'll begin to pursue you. My prayer is that we will continue to become better people, better individuals, better followers of Christ. Help us to emulate who you are. Help us to walk in your image. I pray that Romans chapter 1, I know we've covered verses 1 through 7. Help that to sit. Help the introduction to clearly make sense. Help verses 8 through 15, where Paul longs to go to Rome. Help that to sit and take root and make sense. Help 16 and 17, the core foundation of Romans, that we're not ashamed of the gospel. Help that sit and make sense. And now tonight, verses 18 through 25, where we get the oh no, where we see that there's no excuse. Help it to sit and make sense. That next week, we will more appreciate your teachings. That we will appreciate why Jesus came, because we understand better who we are. In Jesus' name, Amen. God bless y'all. Have a wonderful night. Thank you for coming. See you Sunday. Bring a friend with you. We had a great service Sunday. Look, God's doing something special. I really believe that. And I just want to encourage you to bring somebody with you. We've been having great time at church. We had 805 people in church on Sunday, 806. We had a great crowd. God really moved. A lot of people's been blessed. Do me a favor. Call somebody. Invite them to come to church with you. We really believe the Lord is moving here and people could be impacted. So invite someone to come out, and let's just believe God continue to do great things here. Love you guys. God bless you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that you were touched by the message. If you have a prayer need or would like to know Jesus, please put your prayer request in the comments section and someone will connect with you. If you've been impacted by this ministry and would like to support us with your giving, you can do so online or by texting the word INVEST to 22383. We'd also like for you to join us next week right here in the building. It's so special being able to worship together in the same room. In any case, no matter where you choose to worship, we hope that you join us. Same time, same place. Have a blessed week.